Purpose Haze, a new series featuring Scott Goodson, founder of StrawberryFrog, together with New York festivals. It will defog purpose through in-depth interviews with those at the forefront of purpose-driven companies. Watch what happens when the smoke clears.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Purpose Haze. And we have a really great show today. We're going to navigate right through that big, thick fog of purpose with one of the most interesting, brightest minds in the space, Chip Walker, who has worked at a number of companies, both inside of the advertising world and the change management world, but also in large organizations like Bloomberg, and is now the head of strategy at StrawberryFrog, and has worked with this topic of purpose for many years. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
So the theme of the show, as you can tell, is insights that help us penetrate this wall of fog. So
okay.
What do you think are the most important insights when it relates to purpose?
Well, I think some of them are super obvious, and you would think that they would go without saying, but apparently not. And I'd say things like you gotta do something with it, which again you would think obvious, but harder than it looks.
So people just come up with a purpose, and then what they expect it to naturally just grow?
Yeah.
Like magic beans will just automatically grow.
Exactly. I think there's often a lot of excitement within, especially a large organization, around developing a purpose, and you get the team together to figure it out, and then you announce it, and you put the sign up and make the coffee mugs and the t-shirts, and it's great. And I think there's often then an expectation that something's going to happen, especially if a lot of employees say if they're excited about it. But so often, purpose tends to be lofty by nature. So a lot of times people aren't really sure what they do next. So 6 months will pass, a year will pass, and nothing really happens. And then the leaders are left wondering why. So that's a biggie. There are others. There are times when employees, for example, in particular, or consumers too, that they don't get your purpose. Sometimes it's because the purpose maybe is a little obtuse, but more often than not, they just don't have any context.
But purpose must be pretty hard. These CEOs and CMOs and other leaders, they have to almost get into a different space with their brand. They have to get into that sensitive, empathetic space where you're trying to empathize with what's going on in the world. How tough is that, do you think?
It can be really hard. This is something that they didn't teach in business school. This is kind of a new thing.
Yeah.
And I think it requires a little bit of a different mindset, as you said, more of an empathetic mindset. It requires you to think about stakeholders above and beyond the ones that you're normally taught to think about, like shareholders or employees or suppliers. You also got to think about the community. You got to think about the society. You got to think about your impact on the planet. So that's new, but as I said, I do feel like you see a lot of leaders rising to that challenge. They're jumping on the bandwagon and doing that kind of thing. You see it all the time. You hear folks from CEOs of BlackRock and other major companies. So there's some modeling.
So it's a hot topic, but
so
know how to do it.
So I don't think it's a mystery the way that you've got to think to do it. It's new.
Yeah.
But again, as I said, I do feel what is missing is a very easy sense of what do we do next once we have a purpose. That's the biggie. So
you wrote a book called Activate Brand Purpose.
Yeah, with some guy.
And
who was it?
I don't know, some floozy. Anyway, the book is all about activating a purpose.
Yeah, which is why we wrote the book, because we thought we found it was a big problem.
So I have a question for you about the book. Why is there a coffee mug on the book? I guess it's a coffee mug.
There was a Haze, and I don't know, it just sort of came through. No, I'm kidding. I think, when you think about action and activating and getting your energy up,
Got it. Have a cup
it's
of
just sort of
coffee.
like have a cup of coffee, roll up your sleeves, and let's get ready to do some work.
Very nice. And in that book, you, I guess, addressed the point you just made, which is it's hard to do purpose. There are certain things that you should do. Can you talk about some of the highlights in the book that you think are really important? You talked about doing rather than just being. That's, I guess, philosophically a big thing. But do you have specific steps that leaders should take if they want to sort of take that purpose and let it hunt, as they say?
Sure. Well, and there's the whole topic of just developing purpose and articulating purpose, which is important. And I don't want to make it sound like it's not. That's not really what we were dealing with in the book. So it's a separate conversation. I actually don't think it's that hard to figure out what your purpose is, but we were focused more on activating it. And I think a lot of times what needs to happen, we find, is that you need to kind of put purpose through a lens to make it super actionable. So if you hear a purpose like, one of our well-known clients that, lighting the way to financial well-being was a client that we'd had who had a purpose, which is great. It's a lovely purpose. It sounds good. But you don't necessarily walk away knowing exactly what to do with it.
I guess if you're a frontline employee, what do you do with it?
Yeah, I mean, it may make you feel good about working at the company, which is great. But again, what do I do? So
what do I do? That's something that leaders should think about. We got to give people something to do. Okay.
Exactly. If people do not know how to take action, your purpose is likely to sit on the shelf in the About section of your website.
Right.
And increasingly, you start getting accused of things about like being inauthentic or doing purpose washing. Which I think is so often unfair, because that sort of signals that there was bad intent on the part of the leaders trying to do this. And I don't find often that that's true. What I find is that they had really great intentions. They just didn't know how to make it actionable. So getting back to your question, what can you do? One surefire way that we've found, there's not only one, but one that we've found works really well, is this thing that we call movement thinking. And the whole idea is that people can't necessarily join a purpose, but they can join in and act on a movement inspired by your higher purpose.
Yeah.
Anyone can build a brand and change the world. No, seriously. All it takes is one person to make one idea happen in one corner of our hyper-connected world, and an entire global cultural movement is ready to go by the next time zone's sunrise. In fact, it's happening right now. Culture is changing as we speak, in ways that you might not even notice until bam, it's changed. Look around you. Most likely, all you see is the past. Brands yelling at the world. It's a dancing chicken, look at me. But ideas can be more than just temporary, and brands can be more than just one campaign from obscurity. When you have a movement, all of a sudden we're not just asking to be noticed. We're deciding to be part of something. We're igniting passion. We're revolutionizing hope. We once again think different. And brands need that, more than ever. Because when you connect people together around what they deeply believe in, it's a powerful thing. It won't just change a brand, it will change things for good. StrawberryFrog, cultural movement makers.
So for the example that I was giving earlier, it was for SunTrust Bank. It was, they had a purpose of lighting the way to financial well-being, which is great. Launched it, announced it, but we ended up creating this thing called the On Up movement to activate the purpose. And it was really all about placing ourselves in the shoes of everyone who was living through financial hardship, financial anxiety, the things that everyone deals with in terms of their finances on an emotional level, and trying to help people become more financially confident. So it was a way of framing lighting the way to financial well-being in a way that we said, you know what, we're going to challenge all of our employees and ourselves to make all Americans more financially confident. That's what lighting the way to financial well-being really means.
Hold your breath. Hold it. Hold it. Keep holding. At first, you feel fine. Then panic sets in. What you're feeling now is just like the financial stress that millions of us feel. It's like you're drowning. Meanwhile, big things, little things, the moments that matter, slip away. SunTrust is about to help America catch its breath by lighting the way to financial confidence, to help you make smart choices to move forward, onward, and upward. So now, let go and breathe. Feel that relief? Take the first step. Join the movement at onup.com.
That feels like a bigger idea than a bank mission. So does on purpose the movement make it a nobler cause? Does it kind of make the heartbeat faster? Do you feel yourself part of it? Like, are there elements? What do you need to make that movement become motivating and galvanizing and mobilizing of people, consumers and employees and all that?
Right.
How do you break it down?
Well, I think really strong purposes are often emotional, but I think a movement can even ratchet up that emotional factor even further. And the reason for that is that it puts it in terms of thinking about what we as a company and a brand, as an organization, are for versus what we're against. What is it that we're railing against out in the world given what our purpose is? So in the case of SunTrust, if we're really about lighting the way to financial well-being, what are we railing against? What would we fight over? And really this notion that people are sitting there with financial anxiety was a real enemy that we could attack.
So you're not talking about fighting against your competitor.
No.
You're talking about a bigger idea.
Exactly.
In culture.
Exactly.
Okay. A monster out there.
That's meaningful to folks. And that gives you a sense, that really brings that sense of mission and purpose down to a really granular level.
Something that people are going to run home, pick up a pitchfork and go and fight.
Well, I mean, in an ideal world,
I'm not talking about January 6th. I'm talking about
Yeah, but something that we would fight over, really,
Right.
that we believe in strongly enough as employees and as an organization that it's an enemy that we want to vanquish.
But I mean, I joke about January 6th, but in effect, that's kind of what they did, right?
It kind of
Take a stand against something and then for something, and you really polarize people, right?
Well, I mean, the downside of polarization is what we see in our society, but having a for and against actually can heighten the emotional impact of almost everything we do, which is kind of the idea behind movements.
Yeah, that makes sense. So examples like the environmental movement, right? They have a for and against. We know what Greta Thunberg is fighting for and what she's fighting against. If you mention these words and you immediately think of movements, okay, I get it. So that's a pretty controversial idea, to take a social movement construct and apply it for the purposes of marketing.
But it's also a very
business
practical
transformation
idea. It can be a very practical idea. When we think of the smart car example that we worked on at StrawberryFrog, it made a lot of sense because it was smaller. At a time when people are looking to save money, it's probably cheaper, it uses less gas, it's easier to park, it's more convenient. So a lot of rational reasons to want to buy a smart car. But I think what we landed on in thinking about a movement for the smart car and making them a more purposeful brand is the fact that, the urban landscape had become really kind of blighted by things like gigantic SUVs, taking up the road, causing air pollution, making urban life, the landscape kind of drab and sort of overcrowded. So, we could have tried to sell the smart car on being faster, cheaper, more convenient, but I think we identified this enemy of kind of a decimated urban landscape due to these giant SUVs. And this notion of, could we actually try to help restore the urban landscape to a more pristine state so that life is better in cities for people? And
so you get a clear enemy and who you're for and what you're against and so forth.
Exactly. Right. But you were just saying that it's really controversial. I don't feel like that's controversial. Is it better to sell this car based on convenience or the impact it's having on people's lives in cities? That seems like a practical idea and a smart idea to me.
So I guess in a way you could say it elevates marketing from being a manipulative science to somewhat manipulative still, but for a greater good.
I hope for a reason that benefits everybody.
Everyone. Okay.
That's the idea.
Yep. Okay. And when you sit with leaders, CEOs, CMOs, and so forth, do they get it? Do they see how they can play a role in the world other than just making better widgets?
Yes, and I think it's one of the reasons that we wrote the book, is we were having so many, and this was 2017, 18, 19, having so many top leaders coming in and saying, well, we've developed now our third purpose, and didn't know what to do with it. When we introduced them to adding this lens of movement thinking, I think a lot of times it clicks for people. It makes it a lot easier to execute on.
In your career, you've probably come across purpose statements that are pretty, mediocre at best, or at worst, they're copies of other companies that have the same, our purpose is to do good, or good, something like that. So the movement, in effect, takes that, doesn't say that's a horrible purpose. It just takes it and makes it activates it so that it becomes a movement.
Yeah, I think, you do run across, sometimes, especially in certain industries, I mean, the purpose statements of the leading competitors aren't radically different.
Right.
And it's just kind of
how you execute. Yeah.
But when you put it through that lens of what we're for and what we're against, you start to have many more opportunities to make something that's not only emotionally more resonant, but distinguishing for the company.
Do you feel like, I would assume on a purely executional level, when you think about activations, if you're activating on a product level, you can be humorous, you can kind of be cheeky and creative to get attention. But in the purpose, if you use the movement, maybe there's more depth, there's more to work with. Maybe, do you think the creative tends to be better with movement, a bigger palette, a bigger canvas, or do you think it's smaller?
I think it tends to be always more emotionally resonant. But I think what's important to point out, and the smart car example is a great one, of the movement that we developed for smart car was called Against Dumb. The smart car, it was called Against Dumb. And it was kind of playing up all the kind of craziness with the giant SUVs and all that kind of stuff.
Mass
overconsumption as dumb, and smart's philosophy as, the smart way to go.
Why do so many smart people do dumb things? We buy stuff we don't need left and right. That's dumb. We buy things without the least concern for the planet. That's even dumber. We buy stuff from the Sky Store catalog. Dumbest move ever. Dumb is venti when tall is plenty. Dumb requires multiple remotes. Dumb is 2 for 1 when all you are is 1. Dumb is eating anything bigger than your head. Dumb thinks 12 mpgs A-okay. When it comes to consuming things, America's got a fever of 100 and dumb. And there's only one prescription: to get smart about our stuff. By having just the right stuff. Not all of it. By buying what we need and borrowing what we can. So long, battery-operated paper towel dispenser, we don't need you anymore. Come to think of it, we never did. Let's put an end to mindless consumption. Let's take the junk out of our collective trunk. That's the whole idea behind smart. We're against dumb. Come join us. Smart.
And it was a somewhat humorous campaign. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I think movement thinking makes marketing activation, I think, more emotional and more important, but it doesn't have to be serious. And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
So it can be funny and quirky and whatever.
Yeah. I think it can actually lead to very distinctive and differentiating kinds of creative.
Yeah, Against Dumb is kind of quirky and funny. But at the same time, you definitely know, if you're a smart car driver, what you're for.
Right.
You're not for this, McMansions and hot dog roasters that are 26 across. So yeah, that makes sense. Do you think that every brand deserves a movement?
Does every brand deserve a movement?
Can any brand do a movement?
I think it is possible for any brand to do a movement. Is every brand ready to do a movement? Maybe not.
Okay. What about purpose fails? Can you talk about where, obviously there are successes, and movement is one way of solving that. How do most failures, not how do they happen, but what are the big purpose fails?
Well, we talked about the leaders don't know what to do with it, so we talked about that.
Yeah.
We talked about the average person, whether they're employer or the public, just doesn't get it. You see that sometimes. But the one that probably drives me the most crazy is when the purpose doesn't seem to have any connection to the company's business. The example I frequently use, and I hate to pick on people, but I'll do it anyway. My favorite example.
Drum roll.
Yeah. My favorite example was from 3 or 4 years ago when it was a part of the Planters brand. It was called Nutrition. And I think it was a better for you nut brand.
Right.
And they came out with this purpose that was all around promoting equal pay for women, which is great. And they did a whole campaign about it, TV ads, everything. And they were pressed once, I think, by Ad Age or somebody like, well, why is this relevant to your brand? And they said it was because not paying women equally is nuts. So
pay equality for a nut snack.
Yeah, it didn't work out for them. So that's
why should a nut snack be advocating? I mean, obviously, equal pay is great, but why would a nut snack be the relevant brand to talk about it?
And I think that's where all these issues with things like inauthenticity and purpose washing just get exacerbated when people are like, why? Okay, interesting idea. Why are they saying it? That is an extreme example, but you do have folks saying the same kinds of things, even for a great brand like Nike that was doing all the work in and around Black Lives Matter. I mean, there's some people who I don't know they ever really got like why they were doing it. So I think there are times with nutrition where, for example, they probably needed to rethink that purpose. There are other times when I just think brands like Nike it'd probably help if they were more explicit about why they're doing this.
I think the biggest criticism that, if I'm remembering this wrong, I don't know, but I remember in the case of Nike, the advertising felt like it really sort of leaned into the culture of America in terms of Black culture and sports culture, but in reality, none of the vice presidents were Black. They're all white men. I know that the new CEO that came in focused on that as a main issue, and I believe there's been some change. But I guess when you hold yourself up against that yardstick, you really do, or meter stick, depending on which part of the world you're in. When you hold yourself against that measurement, you can't just advertise it. You really need to have it in the center of the company. Like, how important is purpose activated at the core of the strategy of the company? How important is that versus just a marketing campaign?
Well, it is of vital importance. And you were talking about purpose fails, and that's yet another one where purpose ends up living in the marketing department as a marketing strategy and informs, say, campaigns and that kind of stuff, but really is not adopted throughout the rest of the C-suite. And it's not really driving business strategy or things like hiring and promoting and who do we recognize.
So a lot of hypocrisy.
Yeah. And I don't, as I said, I don't think a lot of it's intentional. I just think this is still kind of
thought
new.
About.
Yeah. Exactly.
So in a good way, it's driving positive change throughout the business world, or at least large portions of it. There are still places that use purpose in a different context, because you created something called the Purpose Power Index, which is the world's biggest or first empirical study, a measure of purpose brands. And there are brands that are on the right politically, there are brands that are on the left politically, and there are brands in the middle. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure.
And where people could find the Purpose Power Index?
Well, it's easy to find. It's just at www.purposepowerindex.com. Purpose Power Index being one word. You can read about it. We've done 3 waves of it. So it's a fairly large-scale study. Each wave is 5,000 or 6,000 people in the United States. And we really asked people, we developed a way with a research company. We developed and validated a way of determining the degree to which the average person thinks a particular company has a greater purpose beyond making money. 4 questions we asked people to figure that out. And it had never really been done before. And we did it in 2019, 2021, 2022. And I think what we've seen over time is, you're right. There are brands on the left, brands on the right. But I think some of the strongest brands don't really skew left or right.
Can you talk examples of which ones are at the top on the left and which one,
Right.
not necessarily left, but those spectrums?
And every year we've done it, it's gotten broader and more mainstream. The brands that people, the public considers to be purposeful.
Okay.
I say the first year, a lot of times it was more social good brands, like Seventh Generation. They're environmentally conscious. Brands like Method, the cleaning products, Ben and Jerry's, which has a history of doing social good. So these were social good born brands. Even brands like USAA, which has just really always been for veterans. So these are social good by birth.
It's an insurance company, right? USAA.
They financial services.
Financial services. Okay.
So it's not, to be honest with you, it's not surprising people would view those brands as purposeful, and
Yeah.
that's great. What we've seen in the past 3 years as CEOs have gotten much more interested in purpose is a lot of established and larger legacy companies are getting a lot more credit for being purposeful. So this is companies like Truist, the large bank, which has made put purpose at the center of everything it does. This is companies like UPS, which has really doubled down on purpose in many ways under their new CEO.
So those are the mainstream. Which ones are on the left and the right?
The left and the right.
Who's big left one?
Well,
Patagonia?
yes. Well, obviously,
I
brands
mean, in Europe, that would be considered mainstream. But
that's
here in
what
America, but it's good to tell it. It's left here, and then the right would be something like what?
Well, I mean, I don't know that they would like to say that they are on the right, but but who've been considered on the right are brands like Chick-fil-A.
Okay.
Considered fairly purposeful, but probably lean a little bit more on the right side.
Got it. Okay.
Brands like Hobby Lobby, they've often been put on the right side, and they're seen as at least somewhat purposeful.
Okay.
On the left-hand side, you have brands like Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's. Obviously, brands like the New York Times really lean much more in that direction. But I got to tell you, the very strongest brands at the top of our list, I don't feel like lean politically left or right. They're much
sort of
more,
in the center.
They're judged, I think, a lot more on what they're saying and what they're doing. A great example of a purpose success story is Pfizer over the last 3 years. In 2019, they were near the bottom of our list of over 200 brands. Of course, the pandemic happened. They had a very, very strong response to it in developing the vaccine that they did. And listen, I know there are probably a lot of issues with it, but the public really took notice. I think they were now the number 11 brand in 2022 out of over 200 based on, I think, their actions. I mean, pharmaceuticals are hated. So, I mean, so to me, what that says is that it's a very dynamic topic, purpose, that you can go from zero to hero in a very short amount of time based on how you act, what you do, and what you say.
And I suppose the opposite, right? You can go from hero to zero.
Yeah,
Do you
we've
see
had some of
examples?
those.
You don't have to get into names, but
Okay.
what sectors? I mean, I would assume technology probably. I mean, they started in the good, the box of good.
Social media.
Social media, they were kind of seen as helping democratize the world. And I guess over time, they're now seen as the naughty ones.
Well, several of them were low in 2019, and they stayed low, and some of them took a big deep dive. So social media has suffered a lot. I'd say there's some brands in financial services that have suffered somewhat in the past 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
You're right. You can go up in the ranking, but there's sure some brands that went down, unfortunately.
In terms of purpose today, clearly there is a lot of different opinions about purpose, and there still is a lot of different interpretations about purpose. Some leaders think it's a mission, some think it's purpose. How do you see it? Do you think it's going to be easier in the future for people to understand what a purpose is and how to do it? Is it just a matter of learning and doing and getting better and training? You think that's it, or is there some other issue?
You mean like leaders or managers inside companies?
Yeah, well, everyone, every practitioner, whether they're on the inside the organization or outside working at an agency or some kind of partner, do you feel like there's going to be a common vocabulary, a common way of understanding and doing purpose? Because it seems that it's still really new. Yeah. That a lot of people, it's the talking item everyone's talking about, but it doesn't seem that there really is a lot of clarity about what it is. And very few people, I think it was less than 25% of the CMOs are actually activating purpose. Do you feel like we're going to get to a point where we understand what purpose is and how to do it? Or is it going to take a long time, or is it going to be relatively fast?
I think due to the proliferation of media and social media, that it actually is moving pretty fast.
Okay.
I mean, just think about what it was like even 5 or 6 years ago when you went in to talk to clients. Chances are they weren't talking about things like purpose, or at least they weren't for me. So I think it's moved very quickly that this has come front and center for many, many, many clients. As I said, I think the outage is that they still don't know how to do it yet. But in terms of like the vocabulary and the definitions and that kind of thing, it is still fuzzy. I think it will get clearer with time. So if you take particular thing about the marketing world, where there are certain concepts that anyone in and around, whether you're working in marketing or not, you just kind of know. If you just go to focus groups with regular people, they'll talk to you about your brand's demographics and its positioning and its personality and all. I mean, everyone in America, at least, and probably in the Western world, knows a lot of those terms. I think probably within 5 years, we'll start to get that way with the purpose world, where people understand the difference between a company's purpose, its vision, and say its values, for example. Those are 3 biggies. Purpose is why it exists. Vision is where it ultimately wants to go. And values is kind of what are the guides for the way it behaves. So I think at some point, those will be a lot clearer to people. And
you're doing a service by writing books about it, so that's a good thing. But getting back to the corporations, companies today, so CEOs or CMOs or whoever launches the purpose, and they hope it's going to be just a euphoric response within. Everyone's going to applaud, and it'll grow and automatically take root.
Have the town hall meeting.
To have a town hall meeting. Yeah. Can you talk? I know you've written about something called the purpose gap. Can you talk about what that is, and how do you solve for the purpose gap?
Yeah, purpose gap is a big topic, and there's some different ways to define it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of gaps in the world of purpose. So I'd say the biggest one we've uncovered that is just very kind of tactically concerning is last year, as part of the Purpose Power Index research, we polled company employees at all levels. A representative sample of several thousand employees. So, all the way from frontline workers to managers, all the way up to top of the company, top leaders. And what we found was that there was a huge gap in both understanding of and engagement with company purpose. And the gap is most notable between, say, frontline workers or especially junior employees and senior management. Senior management tends to be on board, engaged, understand it, love it. The lower you go down the food chain in an organization.
Were you surprised by that? I mean,
I guess not in theory. I was surprised by how extreme it was. It's almost as if folks in senior management, when it comes to purpose, are living in a very different world than folks who are frontline workers or especially junior workers. And when you think about it, I guess it makes sense. But as I said, I was surprised by how severe it was. And that, folks in senior management, they can go to a cocktail party and say, well, I work for XYZ and we're changing the world for the better by doing whatever. If you're a frontline worker, you're probably not having those conversations. And you may not get how your company's changing the world. So
do you have any creative examples of how you've solved that issue where people, like, say, the employees, hard to reach employees are being reached by being creative in how you reach them or something like that?
Yeah. Well, there's how you reach them. I mean, there's first, and it gets back to what we were talking about with the movement, is that you got to find a way of talking to people and activating people in a way that's easier for them to understand. So let's just say you've done that. We talked about that already. Then you've got to find a way to reach people. And having a single town hall is typically not enough. So we worked with companies like, we worked for a very large retailer where it was very hard to reach frontline workers. You can't just email them or text them. They're, on the front lines and harder to reach. So we've done all kinds of creative things, everything from just doing training, making it easier for managers to have critical conversations about purpose and what to do with it, all the way through to certain media choices. We actually ended up using paid media for a particular retailer, in that we were able to geofence their stores and identify their employees, and able to get them adequate messaging to help them understand what they were supposed to do. And this was in and around purpose and well-being, but we're able to finally kind of reach them in an environment where it was hard to do so for the
So geofencing the stores, tracking their mobile phones,
Yep.
delivering messages through their social media so that they hit, was that successful?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. So you can be creative in the message, you can be creative in the media choice. It really challenges you, purpose, to really think differently about solving some of the issues. It actually seems like it puts a spotlight on where there's real failures inside corporate messaging and corporate engagement.
You know, we do a ton of work inside companies, helping them engage their teammates, their employees. And what we find, it's just a truism, and it's true across every industry, every company, almost every person we talk to. People seem to almost have an allergy to internal communications from their company, especially if it's about things like corporate-wide initiatives like purpose or things like benefits. You would think they would want to read this stuff, but they just won't.
Right.
So actually getting in front of people as you go from middle management down through frontline workers is a real challenge.
So,
you know.
so I mean, we'll end our conversation on this last point, which is, it seems like creativity is moving from creativity of message to creativity as a problem solver. You know, if we think about the evolution of the creative services industry, from advertising agency, communications agency, to creative solving problems, some of the problems you've identified here, it seems like it could be the new frontier for agencies to use creativity and strategy to help solve some issues. Because you have the consultants on the one hand who are very good at strategic ideas, but don't do the execution. And now you're talking about people that actually do creative activation.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting area. So I'll just give you some reactions. I'm hoping they will make sense. Yeah, I just feel like when you think about what we've done in creative industries historically, a lot of times it has been skewed more towards marketing, or at least towards brand. And the model was really about trying to be different in a competitive environment and using things like messaging to do that. So what's your most creative Super Bowl ad that you can do to make your potato chip seem crunchier than someone else? So we've all been trained that way. I think particularly as we move into purpose world, we're moving above that. The problems that we're dealing with are broader and bigger. They're at the heart of the company. It's not just what you're saying in your Super Bowl commercial. It's the hiring you're doing. What is the makeup of your senior management? It is how are you treating your employees? What is your employee well-being? It's everything inside and outside the company that it impacts all the stakeholders. So I do feel like as we move more into this purpose world, that it gives creativity a broader sort of palette of problems to potentially solve.
Well, Chip Walker, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Purpose Haze. I know you had some, he was a focus group of one and had some feedback on the name of the show.
Listen, I just didn't know if I was moving into a haze, but you've told me we're actually breaking through the haze.
We're breaking through the haze. And you did that today. Okay. You're a haze breaker, so thank you for being a haze breaker.
Okay, I appreciate it.
And I hear you're writing a new book now, which hopefully, once that's done, we'll have you back on.
Okay, wonderful.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Welcome.
Thank you,
for
Scott.
being here.
All right.
Thank you for being here, I should say.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us again. Another great show. And stay tuned for our next show. See you soon.